You are about to enjoy a fire. Oh man, you are about to enjoy a Firearms Radio Network podcast. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and/or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows. If you like what we're doing and would like to support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. If you'd like to throw us some free support and appreciation, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And then tonight's episode, just like every episode, is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. Be sure to check out the other great podcasts on the Firearms Radio Network by visiting firearms-related.tv. This episode is also brought to you by the new RangeBuddy.App. You can find it on the iOS App Store at RangeBuddy Pro or the Android app or Google Play Store, I guess, at RangeBuddy. It's a catalog of over 120 drills sorted by required target type. You can filter it by the skills that you would like to work. So if you wanted to work on draw to first shot and reloads, there's a filter for that. If you wanted to work on movement and changing gears, there's a filter for that as well. A couple other features in there. You can add drills to your favorites list so you can easily find them and practice them. There's an integrated leaderboard that is specific to each drill, so you can see how, in my case, how crappy of a shooter you are compared to your buddies. And then it does a great job of making purposeful practice easy. Tonight, we are joined by Chris Griese of the Practical Guardian, and we'll be reviewing his extended range handgun course. I think I got your last name right, but I fumbled handgun in that intro, believe it or not. So Chris, before we get into the details, the meat of the course, introduce yourself to our listeners. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the firearms instruction world.
It's going to be helpful if I unmute myself. It's going to be one of those nights already. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. A little bit about me. I didn't start my career, my job, or honestly, other than a little bit of interest in firearms or anything like that. I actually started in a technology capacity, healthcare technology. Did that for a number of years, transitioned that into some public sector for a little bit, and then finally transitioned to working for a local sheriff's department in a technology aspect for them. But continued to work on chasing something that I had a passion for, which was law enforcement. So about 4 years ago now, I started working on that, working as a reserve officer, and then have ultimately parlayed that into a full-time gig. So I'm sworn here through the state of Indiana for a town in a county just a little bit north and west of me. That's my daytime job. I have the opportunity to work for a local indoor range around here. Brian's heard these old and tired jokes, but my old and tired joke with that is when I approached the owner of that, he said, "Yeah, cool, we'll set that up." And I said, "By the way, you can just pay me in ammo because that's what I'm going to use it for, right?" And then after COVID all came along and everything, we sort of had a talk, and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to pay you like normally because you're not worth ammo anymore because ammo got so expensive." So, but I really enjoy that. Indoor ranges are nice when it gets Indiana winters here. And then have the opportunity to teach as a senior instructor for Malk Training Institute, which is out of Southern Indiana. They really have helped me on my instructor journey and sort of cutting my teeth when I was just actually getting interested in firearms and training. And the owner of that sort of really saw something in me. I'm not sure what, but I mean, hopefully it was a good thing. And we sort of worked on that. And so I've moved through teaching for them and just really enjoying that as an opportunity. My company, the Practical Guardian, came out of my experience teaching, learning, being a fellow training junkie like most of you guys. And primarily I teach out of state, so I travel a little bit with that, or I teach some private classes. And then, like I said, I also work as sort of a contract employee for Malk Training Institute there. So that's a little bit about me. Anybody that knows me knows that I can keep blathering on for forever, but let's give somebody else a chance to talk here. So.
Perfect. Brian, introduce yourself to our listeners. What got you into, or I guess what's your background in firearms, and what the heck got you into Chris's extended range handgun course?
Well, growing up, I grew up in Central Illinois. Was around firearms as long as I can remember, through my grandpa, my dad, uncles, things like that. Spent some time in the military. That kind of broadened my horizons on the firearms. After I got out, still had the interest, so I started kind of exploring the options here, Central Indiana, for training venues, be around some like-minded people that enjoyed going out and shooting. Shot and still do shoot some match shoots, but I don't compete against the guys that run race guns. I'm a defensive shooter. I feel like accuracy is far more important than speed is in most cases. Been training with Malk now for probably going on 3 years. As far as the extended handgun course, I don't know exactly what course I was at. Chris was instructing. We were taking a break, and the advertisement that came out about this extended range handgun, and that Chris was going to be the instructor. So I asked Chris, I'm like, so what's this extended range handgun all about? He's like, man, I don't know. I don't even want to do this thing. He goes, they got handed to me, and I told the guy, what do you mean extended range handgun? And somebody's shooting from that far away. I'm probably going to arrest him no matter what the cause is. And I'm like, yeah, I'm there. I gotta see what this is all about. And so that sparked my interest, and turned out to be a very, very good course.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned that you were, the primary task of the handgun is in a defensive role for you. What the heck are you doing taking a class that is that starts at 25 and gets out to 100 yards?
Yeah.
Don't you know that all defensive gun uses are 3 rounds and 3 seconds? Or
that's right.
You have 3 yards, 3 seconds, and 3 shots.
That's right.
So, Chris, talk to us a little bit about the extended range handgun course, kind of where it fits in, and dispel that myth for us. The 3 yards, 3 rounds, 3 yards, 3 seconds. That old wives' tale.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Brian and I were joking about that. That really was sort of how it came about. Was like the idea got thrown out through some of the leadership that I was teaching there, and it's one of those where somebody else is a little bit wiser than you, and they sort of throw a softball up to you, and you're like, "The heck do I do with this thing?" And then when you start to dig into some meat and potatoes, especially when they give you free range to go ahead and work on that, you're like, "Oh, okay, wait a minute. Somebody had a better thought than I did, and let's run with that." So the core of extended range really is, for me, I want to try and highlight that there's no really, and maybe this is semantics, but there's not really, as far as I'm concerned, advanced skills. So it's not like you have some crazy different technique or knowledge that at 75 yards, if you're trying to ring steel with a pistol, that you have now applied because you're a ninja and you've taken 17 classes and you're a better, higher level. The fundamentals really are still the fundamentals. And I know that's cliche, but that's what it is. But it gives us a different context to apply those fundamentals and to really start to see, if I have something that I struggle with, how does that affect me? And it's one thing when we're at the 3 yards, or something like that, or even honestly at 7 or 10. 25, it tends to be where a lot of ranges just have to stop. And so a lot of times we don't have context for that, because we simply can't do it. But even at 25, we just start to get to see some of where maybe we might have an issue, and it's exaggerating because of this degree of variance that we have as we move a bit further back. And so that's really what sort of the core lies in the class. It's not so much, again, that there's some super knowledge or anything like that. It's to really try and bring a different context to the fundamentals of, grit being a master, as John Correa likes to talk about, or what is my structure? How have I taken the time to pay attention to what I need to? And then if I can go just a moment longer, the other thing that I try and add to that is some context. So we're joking and we're right. There is at some point a bit of fantasy band camp, right? Gunnertainment, because at 100 yards, other than to know that I can do it, I don't know that there's really, I've not yet come upon a direct application, right? That's some, you talk to, John Farnham, and there's some you've gone down the wrong path way too many times, right? You've done stupid things with stupid people at stupid times in stupid places to get yourself to need to take a shot somehow at 100 yards. So at that point, it's kind of fun in seeing what I can do with my skill. But when we back it in a little bit, 30, 40 yards, and we can question what the specifics of that case, and I think that's valid, are, but we had the opportunity, the tragedy, I shouldn't say opportunity, in Indiana to see an active killer come into a situation where the event kicked off for that soul that chose to step in and stop the killing at roughly 40 yards was where that started at. So, God forbid it be a norm, but there is a context. One of the things I bring up to my students is, let's look at a place that you are all the time, the grocery store. What's a ubiquitous store throughout the U.S.? Walmart, right? So what's an average Walmart aisle? And, as I start doing some research, and I'm sure they change depending upon, we're looking at roughly 30 yards or meters, depending upon what you want to work at. But so there's a context just in everyday life that could possibly become a situation for us. And so I start to try to tie in an understanding of, this isn't just shooting from a distance. This isn't just for kicks and seeing what I can do, but this is trying to hone some core skills that I have and then apply them to possibly some extremes, but some real life context, and then trying to marry in some things like proxemics, or where's our time distance balance. So how long, if you think about like the Tueller principle, or drill, or whatever word somebody wants to put to that, because I'm sure I'm stepping on somebody's toes with that, but those are things that I try and tie all in with this class.
Yeah, I saw it was TACCon this past weekend, so I starting to see some posts and stuff, and there was a quote that jumped out. Jeff Gonzalez, I guess, during his deal, he said, "You don't just suck at 25 yards, you suck at 3 yards too." That kind of, when you were talking about the class, I'm like, man, that really, as the distance increases, those deficiencies that you have become more evident. One of the things that, Andy and I, we try to take a class. I try to take at least one class with Andy a year. Andy tries to take like 6 classes a year or something, and ends up getting to like 3 or 4. But we were getting ready for, I forget what, I don't know if it was the Tom Givens course, but we were doing a lot of work out at 25 yards, and it shouldn't have been surprising to us, but it was surprising to us how much easier 15 yards was, 10 yards was, right? So if you're getting out there and you're doing work at 100 yards, how much easier does that 30-yard shot or that 40-yard shot become for you? So we skipped a question that we normally like to ask. What's the required gear for the class? And then after you run through the gear requirements, Brian, I want you to chime in and talk to us about the gear that you actually ran during that class.
So as far as required gear, I believe, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I believe it was high point in an Uncle Mike's holster with drop leg somehow wrapped up in there. Requirement for the class, simply because we're working on a little bit of different context. I want to have somebody go through, and it doesn't have to be me or Malk or something specific. If you can give me demonstrable evidence through a certification or something like that you've been through some official training or some other classes. Again, it doesn't have to be us, but I want sort of like a core level 1, what I think of as like maybe a defensive level 1. So you understand a base of moving from the holster, because I just want us to continue to work on practicing those skills. Not like it's exactly super relevant at 75 yards, but let's take the time to get the reps with it. I want you to understand that. That's also going to help me prove that you have a decent amount of firearm safety going on there. And then usually by that point too, you're starting to work your pistol and understand some of those core fundamentals a little bit, so that you're not spending all of class just going, why am I only hitting the sides of the paper? Because you haven't been able to have the time to refine that enough. As far as gear, I'm pretty laid back. Again, there are some extremes where I'm like, yeah, no, not that. Usually my core range where I'm teaching at, simply for insurance purposes, other than my opinion as well. Serpa holsters are a no-go. I'm not doing an Uncle Mike's sticky. I'm sorry if somebody likes that. I'm dropping names there. I'm not meaning to poo-poo on anybody, but I guess I am. I don't want something that's very flimsy. I sort of subscribe to Korea's and a few other people's context for what a holster should be. And especially when we start working different contexts, different distances and things like that, I want to make sure that that's furthest from my mind as far as having to worry, well, this is a substandard piece of gear, so now I have to work around it. Other than that, I try and have a few mags, a reliable pistol. You can have those mags in your pockets for all I really care. Mag holders are nice. Eyes and ears and all the general stuff. That's really about it that's required as far as gear for me.
Is this a 1 or 2 day course?
It's a 1 day course.
Awesome. Brian, what gear were you running?
For this course here, I was shooting my Springfield XD Mod 2 Trijicon night sights. Still running that from the Black Rhino outside the waistband holster. Pretty simple. Try to keep things simple, and that was about as simple as you could get at the time.
Andy's a big fan.
I think I was the only one there running iron sights still.
Yeah, I was wondering. It's funny because a year ago I was just talking to our guests or whatever, probably 80-20, 70-30, 70% dots. And now, I took a class with Tim Herron last weekend, and I think we had one, maybe two iron sighted guns over there. There was a dude running a revolver with a SRO on it. So it's kind of interesting to see how much that has shifted in the last 3 or 4 years. Andy's a big fan of the Black Rhino holsters. So
yeah, they make a good holster. I have several of theirs, even inside the waistband holsters. They make a good product.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm kind of simple when it comes to holsters, right? Everybody's gone down the road of holsters. I have a Serpa holster somewhere, and then I broke off the trigger mechanism on it. But you run down this whole thing of holsters, and then we like shooting, which is Sean Herron, who owns the Firearms Radio Network. They're sponsored by Black Rhino, and then so I started ordering them from there, and then developed a good relationship with Gino, one of the owners, and yeah, man, it works for me. It's simple.
Yep.
I'm almost one of those of like, why change it if it works and it's practical? There's people out there like Chris was saying, you don't want to poo-poo on anybody. Somebody out there is going to say the Serpa works. Somebody out there is going to say the Uncle Mike works, but it's going to work till it doesn't work. And we always have to learn via history of chances, right? And we know the chances are a little higher with those. But yeah, I like Black Rhino a lot. I think they're a great opportunity for a good holster. And stealing, we like shooting's promo code WLS Mofo, get you like 10% off. It's not our promo code, but they share it, and I'm gonna share it too.
And I know this isn't specific, but let me just take a chance to add an addendum on there. I think one of the things that you kind of touched on and out further on, there is a lot, and I want people to hear when they come to classes, everybody's going to have their opinion on things, and I certainly am. And I try and preface that, like, versus a hard, good, bad, whatever, versus you've asked me a question, so let me provide you insight when you're really wanting to know what I feel, but let you understand what I feel. But for a student's perspective too, you have to understand that there's a mitigation of risk that always has to happen in classes. And so sometimes it just becomes one of those that, because of what we've seen, higher possibilities and probabilities, it doesn't mean, I can't remember who said this, but I love the line. It doesn't mean that, your mom's ugly and your dog's stupid. That's not what I'm saying. It just means that because we have to manage that risk and there's a higher possibility or probability, this is going to fall off the map for us. And so we can't do this. So
yeah, if you want to use a sticky holster, by all means, just not on our range. My newest holster, Andy's going to pick one of these up himself in a week or two. It's the new Verdict's SOCP fanny pack. Got that in today, so that's awesome. Talk to us a little bit about where where are you conducting these classes, and how challenging is it, since you're shooting out to 100 yards, to find a range where you can get out to that distance?
Yeah. So again, I'm blessed that my the beginning of my teaching career and then continued relationship with Malk Training Institute. That's MALC, but Malk Training Institute out of Southern Indiana. That they have a really nice facility with a lot of different options. I understand that a lot of people just don't have that. There are challenges when you're out there. So we have out to about 100, 120 yards on the range that we tend to work that. And that's the second range. We have a normal pistol bay, and then we have a known distance range that goes out to about 425 or 450 for a little bit more long range stuff. But we've got a nice bay that's just solid for that. So thankfully, it's not too much of a stretch for us. The only thing that becomes much of a stretch for us, Brian and I were just talking a little bit before we started, was weather, wind specifically. That place is set like in a vortex of craziness when it comes to wind, and so it gives that ready-made, built-in excuse that even at 75 yards, you're like, the wind took it that way. That's why I missed. So there are some environmental challenges, and then, without going too militant on anything, we tend to sort of subscribe to that. If it's not raining, you're not training type thing. That we do classes year round, and about the only time it's going to stop is if we have the significant lightning or the rain's coming down so hard it's ripping targets off and we can't really see effectively, or it's just such adverse conditions that it's insanely causing risk. Otherwise, the reality is it's not always sunny and 70 when we have to deal with whatever we have to deal with, if we would. So environmental factors can be an issue, but thankfully, that's just where we sort of suck it up. We find out what works and doesn't work. We talked in a number of our different classes that temperature can cause the gear that seemed to be wonderful to be less wonderful until I start to realize how I need to work it differently. And so it doesn't really apply as much to this class, but even that, sometimes we run into that. So overall, it's not too much of a challenge. We have the opportunity based off of Malk to be able to run this. But if I were to transplant it somewhere else, like I travel, we're definitely going to struggle unless you have a 100-yard range that we can work on something like this. Now, you can still work on some of the fundamentals at 50 yards. You just don't get as much gun attainment at 75 or 100 yards to be able to work on that.
So we had Ed Monk on the show episode or so ago, and he talked about kind of like what his version of basically a failure drill is. You start working in from 3 yards or 5, whatever it was, and you keep going out until you actually fail to kind of see where your distance is. Is that something you guys do? Do you start close and then work out? And then what kind of target do you guys use once you start getting out to the 50, 75, 100 yards? I know you're not doing 2-inch dot torture drills. So, what's that target look like?
So Brian was, because he's awesome like that, but all of us mere mortals, no, I actually, it's one of those, steal from the people that you value. So I try and give credit to it, but, very much Dave Spalding is where I heard some of that context, or the walk back drill type thing. I find a ton of value in that. And I paired that with Brian Hill of the Complete Combatant. One of his core 4 skill tests is the bullseye targets, and just shooting those from different shooting strings from different distances. And so we started out with that. So again, I want this to be helpful. I want this to, in any class, I don't want this to be defeating to the student. And Brian, I'd like your input on how some of that worked after I get done chattering here. So I want to start out from our first sort of skills test drill, from 3, 5, 7, 10, 15, 25, because very quickly, if there's something we need to address and work on, we're going to see it right there. And then you don't have to spend the whole rest of the class, turning money into smoke and noise, but not actually getting successful repetitions or understanding core concepts behind what's going on. Targets, like I said, we started out with at the very beginning, just I think it's from M3 Technologies. It's just a 6B8 target, be it repair centers. From there, as we worked on different things, I really like, there's a whole lot of different ones that provide value, but I really like the Viking Tactics, the VTAC target that's double-sided, and on one side it has the sort of anatomical skeleton that also then lays out USPSA or an IDPA zones on that. So that gave us up to a certain distance, but once you're hitting, 40, 50 yards like that, I don't care. I've got, in joking terms, I've got the Generation 2 eyeballs. I've got LASIK, and my eyesight's pretty good at this point. I still can't see stuff at that point, and it's not as beneficial if I'm not getting some input. So we transitioned to steel at some, especially at some of those distances. So a steel gong or something like that, and still working with what the best application is on those until you get further back out, or as you get further back out from that point. Brian, if you want to jump in there, what your thoughts are and what you saw as well.
Yeah, it was really interesting. We started out, if I remember right, we started out with just basically warm-ups. We started at 3, moved to 5, moved to 7, moved to 10, which, everybody, including myself, pretty comfortable with. You can shoot those without much thought into it, Then we started moving back further, and you get out to 25, you've got to take a little bit more care with things and slow down things a little bit, make sure that your grip's right, make sure that these things are all working. And I think we went to 30, then we went to 35. And as we did, things start spreading out a little bit. And then Chris backed us up to 15. And we backed up to 15. And I think across the board, the shot groups were tighter than what they had been the first time at 15. And I think I caught on there pretty quick that it was, like Chris mentioned at the very beginning of this, that it was the fundamentals that were coming to play here. The distance was just a distance. It was the fundamentals, and trusting those fundamentals, paying attention to those fundamentals, and the same work. That I think after we came back in, then we jumped back out to 35, and we never came back in. We never came back in the rest of the day. We went 35 to 40 to 45 and 50, and then out by the RV at 100. And I think I said this that day to Chris. We were talking and during one of the breaks, and I told him, I said, it's like shooting. You're shooting by feel. I could tell, and I think it was because I was so zoned into what I was doing. I knew immediately if I pulled a shot. Immediately. When you're at 3, 5, and 7, 10, 15, that pulling that shot you're not missing. Maybe you're not even missing. You may still be in the A zone. But back to what I said at the very beginning about being a defensive minded shooter, at 35, 40, 45, that pulling the shot maybe clear off the target and impacting somebody, something that, have no intention of impacting down range. So it was a big takeaway for me.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you were shooting by feel. I had that we were having that conversation recently with the student. We were talking about shot calling in a class, and it was the instructor is just so in tune with what it feels like, right, that he's able to call that shot much more efficiently than anybody else in class. It was Tammy, who's the instructor, and there was a student that kind of got hung up on that deal, and he's like, the cyclic rate of the slide, it's going to take 0.06 or something to that effect. It takes a human brain, a tenth of a second or a 15th of a second to process that. He was like, how the heck are you calling that shot before the next round is even chambered and making the decision to make up that shot? And I think, it kind of speaks to what you were talking about, Brian. It's, when you're out at that distance, you just kind of intrinsically know when that shot didn't feel the same way, right? Because it just can't be the eyes. It just can't be the vision, right? Right. It has to be something else. And I think that's where, we would joke with Andy. I was like, dude, before I go to class, I'm doing everything at 40 or 50 yards, right? Because that's going to make everything else in so much easier. And then it's, I haven't done anything, right? I wasn't doing work at 3 yards, 7 yards, 25 yards. And then you do a little bit of work at 25 and it makes everything else easier. We might be able to get out to 50 at the ranges that we use, Andy. So what are some of the obstacles that you had, Brian, at distance, right? At let's say at 30 yards and out, what were some of the obstacles or challenges that you found yourself having to overcome, and how did you work through them?
Probably the biggest obstacle that I had to overcome, especially using iron sights, was being able to see the target. Because the further out I went, the less of the target I could see. So I had to trust my hand placement. I had to trust where I was aiming and make sure that everything was right on my end. And I knew that, as long as I did that, I should be where I need to be, relatively speaking, on the target. That was very true at 100 yards. Even on steel, where you're not necessarily trying to hit this 6-inch circle, you're just trying to hit this steel gong. It's a challenge at 100 yards. But if you trust the process, it works, and it showed itself that day across the class. I don't think there was any one of us that attended that class that day that would have spoke with any confidence about hitting a target of any sort at 100 yards with a pistol. But at the end of the day, there were, and it was just because, like I said, we had worked through the processes. We'd learned to pay attention to those details in our grip and in our pull, and our breathing, and all those things that we work on, and sometimes we lose sight of working on. But we focused in on them and made it work.
This is more of a, would you say, not so much speed anymore, more of a precision style course? Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You guys do any?
To add to that, I think I would. So again, to begin with, I want to lay a baseline for people. I want them to understand where they're at, so that we can know where we're starting from to get to wherever we want to go. So to begin with, it's all about the carefulness, the awareness, the taking as appropriate insight and thoughtfulness with the shot as we needed. As we start to see what we can do, where we're at, where things are falling off and whatnot, I do want to try and pair that. So we started having discussions. Well, at a 50-yard dash, so 50 yard line, let's get the peak of performance. What is the best Olympian running that in? Okay, well, that's none of us, right? So what can I extrapolate out that if somebody is from A to, from target line all the way back to me, what type of timing would you expect somebody to close that in? So that I can then start to understand perspective-wise, if for some reason I was taking a shot defensively at this distance. And again, once we start moving in past 50, it just becomes more of an academic thing. Like, how long can we expect somebody to have to run to get to us? But you deal with anything at 25, maybe even up to 50. Some people are going to talk about position too. Well, let me just try and go prone or take a knee or something. Okay, that's cool. Let's start to have that discussion, because let's understand that doing so limits my mobility. And if I have somebody coming at, moving towards me in some type of way, does that fit the context that I'm in? Later in the day, we also then paired those distances with obstacles and or things like a VTAC board, so I could start to break into understanding a little bit of those other different aspects and using different things. Just like later on in the day, we started to talk about communicating more, that we get very used to, to this little guy and its function and actuation and our hands and everything else. But we turn this off, or our brain turns it off for us, and we don't work enough of the communication circuit when something like that happens, whether it's at 5 yards or 50 yards, that we really need to start doing that. And those are things, again, I've seen that in the Complete Combatant has shown that. I think Moss really starts to talk about different things. There's just a lot of different frameworks that we see the value in that. So I want to try and really wrap all those things in as well.
You talk about Complete Combatant with Brian Hill, and Brian here mentioned you guys moved all the way out to 35 and then back up to 15 to kind of just see well, let me ask you, is it to see the differences of grouping to where you're exactly seeing kind of what we're talking about of like shooting from distance, you come out close? Is there like a mental process that's created in there as to why you're doing that?
Yeah, I'll be honest. The first time I saw it was at the academy. At the academy, they, as they're prepping for quals, and you have like a whole week, depending upon what's going on, of firearms. And for pistols, they're, 25 is the furthest qual distance, but they push us back to 50 yards, and everybody's like, "Holy crap, what is going on?" And especially if nobody's ever done that before, you're like, "What am I supposed to do?" And it kind of sucks. And then you get some of us who are like, we're shooting really good, and then we're not shooting so well, and we're like, grumble, grumble, grumble. Why'd you have to mess up my stuff? Grumble, grumble, grumble. And you get done, and then they push you back to 25, which again is the furthest distance of the qual. And all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, that target got larger. Was this like Gulliver's Travels, but reversed? What's going on? Yeah, and it's that mental game. Like, I gave myself a framework. I pushed and I stretched and I allowed myself to know that I can do it at distance. And then I come back, I'm like, score, we're good. That brain trick there. And then, like you said, the Complete Combatant, I'm sure Brian Hill has a much deeper understanding of that, because when you're a guru like he is, that helps. But absolutely saw that there from him as well. Brian, I know you mentioned it, but did that work out in the same way for you as well? That sort of back and forth?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it, like I said, I tend to go through the engagements at 3, 5, 7 almost mechanically, and don't really start processing a lot of information until you start getting out further. And I can tend to get a little sloppy the further out you go. If it's in the A zone, but it was interesting I think that's what kind of got my attention early on, was the fact that once we brought it back in, the shot groups were, like I said earlier, better than what they were on that initial string of what we shot. And that showed me it was all up here. It wasn't so much in what I was doing with my firearm, with my hands and all this and all that. It was what was going on up here, and I caught myself counting, 1 Chicago, 2 Chicago, and something I swore that I would never do. And every time I do it now, and I'm not even conscious of myself doing it. If I'm shooting with Chris, he'll catch me doing it. He'll come up behind me like, I heard you, but it's something that I've learned to use as a mental tool to slow myself down, to, let my brain push the engagement, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah. We work with a lot of newer shooters. Andy and I do, and the minute we can get them out of their own head is the minute that it looks like we're a wizard out there on the range, right? And it's as simple. Hey, and we tell them, it's like, as soon as you get out of your own head, you're going to be surprised at what you can do. And then when they finally do, we just say, hey, kind of told you so, right? It's not as hard as some folks will make it out to, or want people to believe, right? That way, then they could charge, $1,000 for their class where you don't even use the sights or anything, and you got a big old target to shoot at. So what kind of targets are you using at distance? And I know you said you transitioned over to steel. So what's the size of the steel that you're using? And then kind of before we leave that target discussion, what targets should, if Andy or I wanted to take this class, what targets would we look at using at, 25 yards to better prepare ourselves for your extended range handgun course?
Yeah, there's when you get further back 50 plus, again, it's steel just in general. Um, sometimes based off of the first class, just based off necessity of what we had. Some people got it easier to begin with, and some people got it harder. And then we switched sides. And again, we talked earlier on about mitigating risk. At that significant distances, I'm running the lines of 2 people. Just because I can't have a bunch of people shooting. The range is safe enough, but it doesn't matter really for me how many RSOs. There's just other factors that we have to deal with, and so that and a limited amount of steel that we had at the time. But because we started about with that limited amount of steel, we had like an 8-inch gong on one side. So I think Brian, I think you started out with that, and I was like, oh, sorry, bro, push it hard the first time. And then the other side, we had a true like full size, gong. So we're talking like 1.5 feet in diameter type thing. I mean, so it's just dramatically different on those. But again, there's a whole lot more refinement that you're seeing if you're on that 8-inch at distance. For closer distances, I mentioned the VTAC targets, but to be honest, especially with what Jim, with what you were talking about, prepping for classes and sort of working distance and things like that, I really like any variation of whether it's a range master target or the FBI Q target or anything like that, the pop bottle, if you would, simply because it's less generous with its zonage. And so if my mind, especially because I'm moving to a distance, wants to give myself an out or allow myself the opportunity to be like, well, I mean, that's not the best shot, but it is 50 yards, right? The counter to that can end up being those targets where I give myself a less generous scoring zone to help do so. And then if you end up coming to something that is more of a, has a C or a D zone or anything like that, you're already dialed in on something better. So if you're trying to practice that, the other thing you can do is just work miniaturizing of targets. So I don't have a name of a company off the top of my head, but where the stick up targets in dry practice or something like that, where I've shrunk down the style of target, but just significantly. As we said, I don't have the vast majority of people. 25 is the furthest they're going to get in or outdoors. But I can change the size of my target and obviously start to accomplish some of the same goals as far as accuracy is concerned. Trying to simulate some of that same stuff. So,
Brian, I want you to talk to us a little bit about the makeup of the class. Was it all law enforcement? Is it open enrollment? And what were some of the students that you saw, or what type of students did you see on the range with you?
It was open enrollment. I don't take that back. I think there was one LEO there. Kind of surprisingly, the class was made up of a lot of shooters that shoot long range rifle, and talking to them afterwards, and it was their interest in long range rifle that brought them to this handgun course. I don't know, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that there were a whole lot of the normal, I shouldn't say normal, but the usual faces that we tend to see in a lot of the handgun classes. A lot of them were older, age group wise than say your defensive pistol level classes. They had one female in the class, an older female. But yeah, it was, most of the class was made up of shooters that are typically shooting long range rifle, which I thought was kind of interesting at a pistol class.
Yeah, I was just looking over my notes on who attended. I think there was one. I don't remember what he does. I think possible hospital security or something of that nature. But there was one person who works in some sort of security type role. There was one guy that we know really well, Josh, that just recently within the past year hired on for a sheriff's department here in Indiana. But other than that, it was all normal people, just providing a different context. There were, as Brian noted, there were a few people that have experience in competition and have experience in significant distance with a different platform, with a rifle. But there was a great mix of people when it came to that, and there was a great mix of gear. Honestly, as I was just looking at notes, everything from, Glock sort of ruled the day as far as what people used, variations of it. But we had the XDs, we had represented. There was Smith & Wesson, there was SIG, HK rolled in with a VP9. Gotta love that. Canik, made an appearance. So all different sorts of things that people ended up running and bringing to class. And it definitely, I seek to, most of my classes, I want to have open enrollment. I'm not cool enough that you get some other teachers and they've lived a whole lot of different experience. I'm not that crazy ninja green seal underwater guy. That's not my experience. But without, I guess, going too far afield, by and large, I'm also not the type of person who is a limiter on, well, this is skills or this is context. I don't provide that to you because you don't really need to know that. Here's what you need to know. Without going too far to field, and I don't want to step on too many toes here, but who am I to tell people what their context is? I don't know your life. I don't know what you're running into. If you have a farm, you could run into something dramatically different than me living in a city. And so I would much rather say, here's what this is. Let me help you understand how this might apply to you and let you help me know what your context is so we can work together to provide the best journey and the best knowledge and skill gain that applies to you. We're all different. And so there's no, I don't like that concept. I guess that's why this coming in. I really don't like this concept of this is hidden knowledge. This is specific, over here. And maybe there's a context for that I'm not off the top of my head thinking, but this is definitely an open enrollment. Most of my classes are, unless we really want to set something up for an agency that's trying to get his stuff hammered out. So
I was kind of thinking back when you guys were talking as far as distance, and Brian mentioned the kind of the older crowd that came to this course. Just some thought processes for me. Maybe somebody saw extended range handgun, and back in the day, bullseye shooting was king of the hill, right? So do you think maybe there was some relation to that, of maybe that's why you had some more older generation, maybe long distance rifle guys that they wanted to come and relive maybe some bullseye style shooting?
I think that might be part of it on one or two. With those one or two exceptions, even though we're saying older, it's relative. So it's not terribly older significantly. So it's just not the 20 or 30 something crowd. I gotta be careful because I'm suddenly getting into that older crowd before I realize it,
I've been there a while.
Yeah. But I think honestly what it was, and again, we have the perhaps unique opportunity through Malk Training Institute, through the Practical Guardian, to work. There's a lot of us that come through a third entity, and I don't want to spin off too much, called CCRT, or Civilian Crisis Response Team, which by and large, there's a lot of aspects to it, but it's a training group. So it's an annual membership of training. And so we see a lot of the same people that come through a lot of these classes, and we know a lot of each other. And so sometimes it's literally just, hey, I saw the email about this. I know the people surrounding this. I know it's good. There's going to be something in that description that caught my eye. And I know there's going to be something that I learned because I don't know this stuff, or I don't know this maybe unique application. So, hey, I'm going to show up. So we live with a lot of fellow training junkies, I guess is another way to say it. And so part of that, I think, was simply just the interest, at least on the initial class. After that, I think word of mouth spread. And again, I think people started realizing it's less about one thing and it's more about the contextualization and understanding of skills through those different contexts.
Awesome. So I have a couple more questions. I'll give you one, Brian, and then back to you, Chris. Brian, kind of in the realm of bullseye shooting, when we originally, learned that first NRA instructor course and NRA basic pistol, we talked about, holdovers of the irons, of like covering the center of the target with the dot versus a 6 o'clock hold. Did you notice any of those differences when you got out to distance, or was it just kind of the same of what you usually normally shoot? Did you make any changes, I guess, is the question.
Oh, absolutely. By the time I started making those changes by 50, but definitely when we got out to 100. And I tried to play it a little smart. Decided I was going to start calling shots for people. And it was more so I could watch what they were doing and see where their rounds were impacting, so that I could maybe get some of that out of the way by the time it came my turn to go. And, definitely at 100 yards, there was a lot of holdover. And that's where the shooting by feel came in, because I think on my first round, my first shot at 100, Jeremy, I think it was Jeremy was there, was telling me, he said, "You're just a little low." And so without, like I said, at 100 yards with irons, I couldn't see the steel. I knew where the steel was, but I couldn't see it. And so I just raised my sights up a little bit, and the next 4 rounds were on steel at 100 yards. So, Kentucky windage, whatever you want to call it, that's at 100 yards. That's what it was for me. And I was talking to some of the other shooters there after class that were shooting with the red dot. That was about the time I started making my transition into the optics world. They were in the same boat I was in, using iron sights, even with the red dot. They weren't able to see the target either. Their dot was so far above the steel at 100 yards. So they were running into the same challenges I was using irons.
I can see that'd be interesting, if you have an SRO and you got that big 06 MOA dot. I mean, what do you just put the dot on the back of the berm and press the trigger? I don't. There's not much,
right.
Not much left there. So Chris, over to you. We often talk about standards, and Jeremy and I, we have brought this up quite a bit in our past courses. There's got to be some kind of standard involved as far as seeing results, right? If you go in and you just shoot a bunch of stuff and at the end you're like, oh yeah, I learned some stuff, but you never had any standards to kind of gauge yourself of like the beginning of the course versus the end of the course, what do you have? So I guess I'm going to kind of put you on the spot. Do you have any kind of standards that you apply to your students to where they can see a measurable change and difference in the course?
Yes. Is my answer. No, in all seriousness. So a lot of my other courses, I have sort of definitive, either somebody else that I borrow something that I really, really liked, or something that I've come up with on my own standards or skills check or something like that to end the class with. So also a lot of times as a culmination. So my level 2 handguns, for example, we've gone over a lot of different things, and now I'm asking you to put all these different things together into a course of fire, and then we add metrics and time and accuracy to it. This one, at least in its current iteration, because I'm also a person who usually my classes, I try to actually have them not remain exactly the same. I'm going to learn more stuff. My students are going to teach me where I'm sort of sucking. And so I'm going to modify the class a little bit. And as I learn new things, I'm going to find a different way to do things, hopefully better. So current iteration of it, it's almost the metrics start to come through while we're in class. It's not a culmination at the end. At the very beginning, there's a metric of just the, like I said, the complete combatants, the bullseye drill. Like, where are you at in that? I believe I'd have to look at my sheet to be off the top of my head, but I believe there's a 400 points overall there. Obviously, I don't have a time component, but I have an accuracy component. And so where am I at with that when I don't have any urgency? As we start to move to different distances, we start out just seeking to understand where we're at physically, in relation to the target, how far away, and then how much I need to pay attention, how careful do I need to be. Once we get that sort of hammered out through a few repetitions, I add in a time component so that you can know. And that's where I said, I'll pull in that context of, there's not really a 30-meter dash in the Olympics or anything like that. But if we can extrapolate off of a 50 or 100 yards, what is a peak person who is in peak physical condition going to move from A to B at? Well, that should be that's one piece of timing for us. And then let me extrapolate that out to a little bit of a difference, and that's sort of another end of a time component. And so let's run that. Let's see where we are. Am I putting shots where they need to be within this certain time frame? And if not, you understand that you're not. Once we get into the further distances, it becomes more about my accuracy component. Am I making shots? Was I able to connect at all at 100 yards? If not, what did I see consistent throughout the class? Plus, as Brian said, sort of feeling, shot calling, all those things wrapped together. What consistently through class can I conjecture or just come straight to it with data saying, yeah, I'm not hitting at 100 yards because X, because my grip relaxes and I don't pay attention, or whatever component of that. So there are, but there's not in the nice sort of complete bundle that I have in a lot of my other classes at this point. But I'm in the same boat with you that I want somebody to have some sort of criteria walking away to judge where they came out of class with, so that it's not just, oh, that was fun, and oh, I learned that, I can make a shot from this, but why can't I? What's the different context, especially as I get in more reasonable distances? Well,
I think to add on to that, kind of back up to the question I answered before, when I use the term Kentucky windage, the 4 shots that I connected with on steel, it wasn't an accident. The metrics to me was, I took everything that I had picked up on throughout the day of how I was shooting, what I was doing, where my shots were landing. And I focused in on that at that 100 yards. And so I knew that if I do A, B, C, and D, this is where the round should impact. And to me, that was the metrics of the day. And in my mind, to me anyway, it proved itself to me. Like I said, my first shot was low. That was from not being able to see the target. But once that second round hit steel, the next 3 hit steel, because the way the course was ran throughout the day, I had learned to, hone in on these things that I need to do to put rounds on target. So to me, that last run of the day at 100 was the metrics of the day.
And there is, I know the last iteration of this class, or the last opportunity, that time that I had to run it, we did this. Brian, I don't know if we did this in your class. Again, it's not so much that there is a specific standard of, I'm at 100 yards, draw first shot, get into whatever position that I'm wanting to take that shot from, and I made it in under 10 seconds. I'm just throwing out a number. It's not so much that, but I give students the opportunity to say, here's our distance. There's a beep. In real life, you can have that, whatever it is. There's a go signal of some sort. And what does it take me to get to where I want to make the shot that I need to, and draw to that first shot? So that you do walk away, as you noted, Andy, that you do walk away with some context. So does it take me 17 seconds to make a shot that connects, and it was the 4th shot at 100 yards? Or more practically, does it take me 10 seconds at 50 or 40 yards to make a shot that connects, and the same thing, it was the 4th shot? Now, especially when we bring it back in closer, 50 yards for me is not exactly close, but relatively speaking, now that's a whole different ballgame. And we add in through our discussions and our breaks to some legal context, like, do not call, not that you would, but don't call me if you're making the shot at 75 yards with a pistol and then calling up, so like, because I do not want to be your lawyer for that. Let's draw a delineation between when this is fun and interesting, what can I do, and what's likely to have some actual application. But you add then to that our discussion of like, wow, at 40 yards, it took me 10 seconds just to get a shot, and that first shot didn't even hit. Brian, you mentioned it earlier, didn't even hit the target, which means it hit somebody else entirely likely. Wow, that's not something I'm comfortable with. So, okay, we're not the person that we are at this moment for the rest of our lives, but now you know where you are right now. So practice, do some things that we talked about, come back, and you keep that piece of paper, and let's see what you do next time. Or let's see what you did in your own practice. And you can, message me, call me up, something like that, and be like, I drew at 40 yards. And my first shot was at 4.5 seconds, and it was, in the C zone. That's awesome, especially if that example I gave was where you started out with. And ultimately, that's what I want to see in students too. Is I want that success, whatever it is for you. I want to see that excitement from them. Because I guess I'm a vampire in that way. I'm feeding off of it with you. It's exciting for me if it's exciting for you, and I just want to see them succeed in that way too. So,
yeah, my final on, I'll kick it over to Jeremy here, was, we always talk about self-defense shooting, right? And that's what we usually do, because that's why most of us carry guns. But there's always that, and part of that with that self-defense, and we've kind of covered this, is shooting from distance makes you better shooting up close, makes you faster shooting up close, because you start learning those time differences. You start learning the target sizes. And it surprisingly, it does. Jeremy started this off with, me and him often, we used to compete against each other, draw the first shot and steal 25 yards. And then we went up to 7 and we're like, wow, this target's huge, So it's relative, right? I look at it in the other respect of, like you mentioned, it doesn't have to be self-defense. What if you're a rancher and you got a coyote out there attacking one of your animals and it's at 50 yards? Man, maybe you might take that shot, So anyway, I think it's a good thought to take us out of the process sometimes of all the things we typically do, all the fun stuff, running and gunning, speed, accuracy, and kind of maybe taking a breath and say, let's push this out to distance and use our fundamentals to where we can get better at distance, to where it also makes us better up close, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my thought process on it. Jeremy, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, man, it's the you asked the question about standards, and I was going to kind of phrase it a little bit differently. I was going to ask Chris, hey, what the hell are you thinking? Don't you know that most firearms instructors don't get out past 7 yards? And here you are taking folks out to 100. So, in the context that I like to talk about standards is if an instructor doesn't hold their students to a standard, they're not holding themselves to a standard. And you have no way as a student taking that class to know whether or not you got your money's worth, right? And you just bought fool's gold. And to what Brian was saying, I think the proof is in the pudding. When you're getting out there at 100 yards and you're taking shots on steel, there's a whole lot of instruction that has to go into the work that you do at 3 yards, 5, 7, 15, 25 yards, and then at 50 and 100 as an instructor, to build the confidence up in your students enough to where they believe they can take that shot and make the hit, right? Because it's a vastly different world at 15 yards than it is at 7 yards, than it is at 5 yards, than it is at 3 yards. And we talked about it in the beginning of the deal, is the minute you can get your student out of their own head is the minute that they become exponentially more accurate and more capable with their handgun. And here you are putting folks out at 100 yards where you can't even see. I can't see the damn target at 25. Andy was like, hey man, let's zero. When I zero my red dot, I'm like, fuck dude, I can't see my target. Can I get a spotting scope? Something? Can I set up my GoPro so I can I can't at 25 yards, I can't see the B8. Right. So it's interesting. It's cool to see, right? And we had a comment about, the difference between competitive and defensive shooting is interesting. Being able to hit something at 50 or 100 plus yards is a serious, fun challenge, but it can mean a different thing in a defensive situation and the legality later. And it's cool. That's a completely valid point. And I think that's one of we talk about, Andy and I, we used to battle about, trigger control and grip and sights, like which is more important than the other. Right. And I think, I will play the devil's advocate and I'll say, oh no, sights and trigger is more important than grip, or grip trigger is more important than grip. But the reality of it is you have to have decent trigger control to make your training relevant and improve yourself once your grip is what it needs to be, right? Because otherwise you're gonna start spinning your wheels. And I think once you get outside of 25 yards, that's where everything has to come into play. And I know we started talking about legality, and that's not exactly where I wanted to go with it, but yeah, absolutely, you're gonna be hard pressed to convince somebody that you had to shoot some dude at 100 yards, but maybe it's a 25-yard, shot on a reduced target, right?
I like the idea, and I've not been seeing the Facebook comments, but I think that person is spot on when we start talking about legality. Again, we start to touch on it. I like the vehicle that this class allows us. So it's not a legal issues class. It's not a primary focus. It doesn't even draw some or as much direct attention as like image-based decisional drills does, which I love. That's one of my favorite classes to teach and talk about. That being said, I love the idea that we can start to build a conversation while shooting, because right or wrong, sometimes we just get our own selves or students with us that I want to go bang. And you know what, maybe to their credit, and maybe as a indictment of the system of the teaching, maybe sometimes they've been taught that everything is a nail. Every time that it potentially is some type of encounter, I have to get the hammer out because it's a nail. And so maybe to some degree it's not as much their fault. That's the instruction they've been given. And so I love the idea that this class can start to bring, while shooting, while having the fun of hammering nails, it can start to bring about a discussion to where the person goes, huh, oh yeah, wow, yeah, I don't even want to, I made the joke about being a lawyer. I don't even want to think about this. Like, holy crap. Or, everybody, I don't know why it's a 13-year-old girl all the time, but we just thought a 13-year-old girl type thing. But, it can start to have that discussion and then lead us down, or bring people that wouldn't necessarily have recognized it, bring them to a spot that they're open to having the discussion and realizing, oh, wow, I need other tools. I need to be aware that not everything is the nail that needs hammered. Sometimes I'm the guy that just needs to go away. And sometimes I need to recognize that that's my option, and that's the best option. It's the first good choice to make, all those different things. So I really enjoy that we can start to have that legality discussion, because it's sort of glaring in our face that we're dealing with such dramatic distances.
Yeah, oftentimes I like to, I say the what if monkeys in class, right? Because we can what if so many things. So there was a comment earlier that Jeremy kind of briefly posted up there. I don't know if he can pull it back up. And it was talking about the legalities and stuff. Yeah, all good. It was the other one. Sorry about that. All good points. Learning and what is a lawyer. Let me read that correctly. Learning and what is a lawyer isn't involved. Maybe the rancher needs to take a shot. Also note to rancher, take a rifle and know how to use your pistol to maximum range if you must. And I agree with some of that stuff. And for me, that what if monkey, right, is rancher, take a rifle. Well, you know what, Andy, if it wasn't for Andy's wife, I wouldn't know where my wallet and my keys were half the time. So I'm the rancher, and I take the rifle out to go do what I got to do, and I forgot my box of ammo, or I didn't load the gun, and all I have is my sidearm, right? So those things can play a point. And the reason why I'm kind of mentioning that is when we talk about this legality thing, right? A long time ago, we kind of joked about the 3 yards, 3 seconds. That's where all fights, end up 3 to 7 to 10 yards, right? Well, you created a perfect example right there in your state. Somebody just took a 40-yard shot, right? How do we know that this 40-yard shot doesn't one day turn into a 100-yard shot where there is somebody from one end of the Walmart or the other, and it just so happens you're the only guy there that's got a gun, and he's busting caps on people's heads from a distance, and you may choose that shot. Now, what I'm saying, don't take this wrong. Don't go run around like trying to take 100-yard shots at people. That's not what I'm saying. But this what if monkey can go on forever. But I do think that it is something to consider. If I was to have to take a 35-yard shot, Costco, Walmart, Sam's Club, can I do it? And have I ever even practiced it? And Jeremy mentioned most people don't. And then my final point on that is we talk about fundamentals a lot. Everything we do, as you started with, Chris, is fundamentals, right? There is no advanced shooting. It's just refining your fundamentals, right? And the one fundamental that the other day I was driving to work and it just popped in my head. I don't know if I heard it on a podcast or somebody said it, but I'm kind of personally coining it right now. We talk about all the fundamentals of grip, sight, stance, trigger control, all these things, right? But we're forgetting the last part of the fundamental. And it's one of the most important. What is it? The mental aspect, right? Do I have the mental ability and the capacity to be able to even think about taking a shot like that? It all starts there, in my opinion, right? Wouldn't you guys agree?
Absolutely. From a student's perspective, I think it's easy for individuals to get hung up on the legalities of a shot at this distance and all those things. But from a student's perspective, I kind of viewed this class as, in the military, we ran confidence courses all the time. Now, these confidence courses weren't something that, rope ladders went out in World War II. So the practical application of all these things, that wasn't the message. The message was that this confidence, you had built this confidence that if, it laid that groundwork for that confidence to be there. 9 out of 10 times that confidence, is going to be utilized at a far shorter distance on a flat range somewhere. But like you said, if God forbid you ever got put into a situation where you had to take the shot, that you had never taken that shot before, that'd be an even more difficult decision to make. So that's how I kind of viewed this course. And I whether courses last 1 day or 2 days, I'll spend the next week or maybe even 2 weeks breaking these things down in my head. Okay, what did I take away from it? What did I learn from this? And I'll start implementing that. I try to shoot at least once a week, or try to shoot once a week, and applying something new that I may have picked up from an instructor or from somebody else shooting on the range. And so, like I said, this course here was more of a confidence course than anything. And I don't want people to get hung up on the legalities of a 100-yard shot to deter them from taking this type of course. Because there's a lot to be taken away from it.
To dovetail onto that as well, I'm sure we've all run into this. We very easily, humans in general, we tend to, without thinking of it often, I think we tend to run back to what's known, what's comfortable, what we know we're good at, right? We look at this because I'm awesome at it and I can do this. And there's benefit from that. There's things to be learned from that. But I think there's also benefit to stepping outside of ourselves and going, okay, wow, this is, I wouldn't have even thought to try and work on that or to really attempt that because I don't have, to your point, Brian, I don't have the confidence in my skills. Well, let's work on that and see where we can get that together. And as my comfort zone or my uncomfortable zone changes, when I get a little bit more like, okay, I mean, I can deal with that. Good. Now I have context, metrics. Now I have context that I can actually do these type of things. It builds the confidence and it allows us to have a lot different perspective on what exactly is available to us in the moment.
I'm glad you touched on the confidence piece, Brian, because that's where I was going to go to next, man. I was going to, in your role, right? How much after attending this class and getting that positive reinforcement, and that gratification of ringing steel at 100 yards, how much confidence does that give you? And then knowing that the indecisiveness causes, split seconds, right? And those split seconds compound upon one another, right? So having the confidence and the knowledge that I could take 100-yard shot. So, the incredible confidence boost, and knowing that you have the capabilities at 100, therefore you have the capabilities at 25 or 15 or 30 or 40, right? To mitigate the potential negative consequences from that doubt, right? And we've seen, I was watching the video. It looked like it was a vehicle chase that ended up with a dude taking a hostage inside of a little storage security shed, right? And then you see the one guy, right, the one officer, and then you see the other officer come up, and he has his handgun. He's talking to him, takes the shot, right? Or the officer get out of his patrol vehicle, and in the middle of all this chaos and rounds being shot at his fellow officers, he very calmly aims down his rifle and makes the shot. And in these officer involved shooting videos, for me, it's easy to pick up the officer that has the confidence in his or her abilities to make the decision and make the shot. And they're the ones that are typically rising to that occasion. So the confidence boost, man, is I'd imagine is worth the cost of the course and then some. We had another comment here from our good buddy Tim. He said, "Great takeaways just from this conversation. Class must have been awesome." And it sounds like it was, man. We had so I posted it in Andy, and, talking to Andy and Tim, and I posted in a group somewhere. I don't know how the heck it came about, but I was like, man, what do you think a reasonable time to bust a clay from concealment at 25 yards would be? And somebody was like, sub 3 seconds. And I was like, you're absolutely nuts, man. It's got to be 8 seconds at least. And Tim was like, nah, man, sub three would be reasonable. And I'm like, your guys are freaking nuts. There's no way. So we're out there on the range one day, and I put up a little clay target about 25 yards from the holster. First time I attempted it, beep, 2.39 seconds. And I'm like, what in the seriously? And then I was able to, very little bit of work, but it was the confidence then that allowed me to consistently be able to do it from appendix concealed in under 2 seconds. But the biggest thing was the confidence, knowing that I was able to hit a 4-inch target at 25 yards from concealment. Just allowed me to take that mental piece out of it. And that's a very long-winded to say, man, I can't imagine the confidence boost that it gives students, especially the folks that are involved in a law enforcement capacity, where they might have to roll up on scene and make the decision or not make the decision. Nobody's going to fault the guy for not taking a 40-yard shot, right? Nobody's going to, hey, man, why didn't you take that 40-yard shot? You could very quietly just kind of fall back and wait for somebody else to save lives. So that's pretty freaking cool. And Christopher,
listen, I saw Cocaine Bear last night. Have you guys seen it yet?
No.
Tell you what, I'd be taking 100-yard shots too at Cocaine Bear. You guys got to watch it. It's good.
Christopher Bean earlier, he said Chris, and then he's saying belief is 90% of the game, and absolutely correct, man. That's a great point. What else? What other thoughts do you guys have? Are there any questions that we should have asked that we didn't ask? It's we typically don't get into these high precision courses. The conversation, and when Andy sent over the name of the class, I was like, and I looked up the course description. I was like, man, 25 to 100 yards. That's pretty. It's pretty bold. But now, through this conversation, it's very intriguing. And I think it's going to, force me to see how deep the berms go at our range out here in a couple weeks. And Andy he brought out an 8-inch piece of steel. And I was like, dude, that's way too big. But I think we might put that sucker at 50 yards and see what we can do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that big at 50 yards.
No, we were, oh man, I got these little dinky 3-inch steel targets that I bought on some steel site. I got them at cheap. I got them like $5 a piece because they were on clearance, and they're like 1/2-inch steel. So that's normally what we'll hang up, and we'll start, popping shots at 25. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm looking forward to. Do you teach this class anywhere outside of your home state?
So I have not had the opportunity to teach this class anywhere outside of my home state. Again, given the right context. So if we can work on some of the range considerations,
we got a 100-yard range in Albuquerque. I didn't think about it, but we rent one of the ranges that we're on. Goes out to 100 yards. It's the police range, but I think we might be able to.
Sounds like somebody needs to talk with somebody or something. But joking aside, yeah, as long as the range considerations are there, absolutely, it's something that will travel.
Okay, because it's something that I would definitely love to see my capabilities, and I think for that, just knowing my limitations and what I go through in a class setting, for me to get out there, I definitely feel like, taking a class with and being instructed and taught and coached through that process of getting out to 100 yards would save me a ton of money on ammo. So we might have to talk about hosting you out here and seeing if we could fill a class, because we definitely do have access to a 100-yard range.
And that's something you mentioned on it, and then you're talking about that's the other thing too, from my perspective, at least. Brian, you can cue in if you feel differently on this. The round count on this class is not dramatic as far as I'm concerned. I believe the posted round count is 200 rounds. So it's not a 500 in a day or something like that. Again, working through meaningful repetitions and understanding what I have going on, to me, is worth as much, if not more, than I shoot a bunch. And it's that I don't mean that to say that shooting a bunch can be bad, especially if somebody else is sponsoring me for ammo. It's always good. But I want people to be able, I want the class to be approachable for people. I want them to be able to walk away, come to class, and not have that be a hindrance, and then walk away saying, yeah, that was ammo well spent, and I'm glad that it didn't prohibit me from attending or from finding out what I needed to.
Yeah.
Sweet.
This is an enlightening podcast for me too, because I saw extended range and I'm like, what's extended range? 25 yards? We do that. That's nothing. And then Jeremy mentioned in the beginning, he's like 100 rounds. And I'm like, wait, what? 100? Is this a rifle class? Right. But I agree with Jeremy. I think you've brought us some good insight, both of you, Chris and Brian, on some challenging and I think ultimately probably rewarding at the end of the day courses to shoot at a distance like that and gain that mental confidence that we talked about. So I appreciate that. So for me, it's kind of I don't really have much more to say on it. I just think it's pretty interesting. I would have never thought of taking a 100-yard pistol course. That's like almost saying taking an 8-hour, non-dominant hand shooting course. Who wants to do that, right? But now I'm kind of thinking, maybe I would do that. I don't know. But anyway, Chris, I appreciate you coming on. I'd like to know where we can find you more. Do you have a website? Can I put your phone number on here or what?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna beg off on the phone number until I get to know all you. But please, my email and my website and my Facebook, my Insta, all that. Feel free to reach out. And I'm not talking just like to schedule a class. Obviously, I appreciate that type of thing. But if you just want to talk about something, figure out a way to work on something that's really bugging you, reach out. This is a people thing for me, not so much the class stuff. But anyways, the Practical Guardian at gmail.com is where you can reach out directly to me. My website is thepracticalguardian.com as well. And then the Instagram, again, I should be the Practical Guardian on Instagram, and on Facebook, the Practical Guardian as well. So should be a theme relatively easily there, remembered for one and all. I really appreciate the opportunity for you to have myself and Brian on here. Thank you for that. I appreciate your kind words. And there was a class now that I feel that you just talked about something, doing something, and now we got to figure out a different class for that weird wonky thing that it was a joke, but it's going to fall into space because I can't remember what you just said. So
the non-dominant hand
there we go.
only
Yes,
course.
8 hours of non-dominant
Yeah.
hand. I have a new course idea.
That's
Awesome.
my niche. Called it. No.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, hey, one of the questions that we asked last week, what are a couple other instructors, Brian and Chris, what are a couple other instructors that you would recommend your students train with? Present company excluded, right? So Brian, you can't be like, oh, Chris, and Chris, you know what I mean? So, and then Chris, we'll kick it off with you, and then Brian, if you want to follow that.
Oh, wow. So yeah, I mean, I'll caveat out the Malk staff, the Malk Training Institute staff, because I work with them a lot. I mean, all the instructors there on various different things would be somebody that I would send somebody to in a heartbeat. Really what you want to accomplish is going to drive some of this, but there's so many good names. I joked about him being a guru, but Brian and Shelley Hill of the Complete Combatant are somebody that I find tons of value in. Whether you make the journey down to the scenic Georgia to go to them, or whether they happen to come close to you, is somebody who I would definitely train with. We've talked a lot about dots, and Brian, we were joking about this earlier, but Scott Jodolinsky for me is sort of one of the pinnacles, if not the pinnacle, when it comes to just a wealth of knowledge, experience, and understanding when it comes to a lot of different things with shooting, but definitely application of a red dot. So that's something that I'm going to suggest and throw in there. Active self-protection and John Correa, Neil Widener, Stephanie Widener, just that whole group. If you have the chance to take a class from them, that would definitely be something that I would suggest. And then a finalization while I dovetail into that and kind of plug for that is, if you're like, these are all great, man, but I have very, very limited resources in time and money. And so you speak to me. What can I do? I'm going to really recommend the Active Self-Protection National Conference. Yeah, I mean, again, those are friends, and I end up out there as well. But it's a 3-day conference out in Manhattan, Kansas, not New York, because that'd be weird. But out in Manhattan, Kansas, and the whole weekend, besides being welcoming to anybody, whether you've really touched a gun or not, the whole weekend is a fundraiser for a really good cause, foster teens, and stuff like that. And so 100% of everything goes there. So it's that sort of seminar style over the course of a weekend where you're getting multiple chunks. So you can literally, all the people that I just mentioned, I believe, I don't know that Scott's had a chance to be there, but the majority of the people that I just mentioned, you can end up taking a class from them at that event instead of having to run around all over the place. So if you searched Bullets and Bibles, I believe that's what that's called. But again, if you're not a that type of specific faith person, don't let that deter you. But it's a really, really great opportunity. So Brian, let me kick it over to you if you have some thoughts on some different people as well.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Chris said, if you're, in the Midwest, anywhere near where Malk offers classes, another very good instructor that operates out of there is a gentleman by the name of Kenny Bigby. Kenny Bigby brings a lot of energy to the range. Kenny's a ex-Navy SEAL. He's a great instructor. Like I said, his energy level is through the roof. And you end up taking a lot away from a day or two on the range with Kenny. All the names that Chris mentioned, I agree there. I got a training here in just a couple weeks with TRICOM down in Southern Indiana. Then Kyle DeFore, I'm going to shoot with him a little bit later this year. I think from just the normal standard everyday carry guy, find a local USPSA match near you and shoot. Don't get intimidated by the guys with the race guns. You're never going to match their times. Their times are stupid fast. But compete against yourself. I still shoot those at every opportunity. When I go to the scoreboard the next day or whenever, I'll look at the number one guy who's 9 times out of 10 has been running a race gun, just for interest's sake, kind of compare myself to him. But I look at what my score was that day versus what it was 2 weeks ago. And I think you can take these lessons from instructors, master level instructors, and you can make them go so much further by honing your own skills, in between those times. So it's easy to get intimidated by guys at matches. Don't, get out of your own head and build up that confidence level and go shoot. It's the best way to put into practice the things that you take away from, opportunities to train with top caliber instructors.
I love it. Andy, any parting thoughts?
Just to add on to Brian, Steel Challenge is another great one. We were talking about 8-inch gongs, and when I did buy those steels, Jeremy was like, damn, dude, what are you going to shoot with those things? They're like huge, right? And then I started shooting Steel Challenge, and you often shoot bigger steel than the 8-inch. And so I think competition, absolutely. This is something that's sometimes or often covered. Competition is self-defense, and self-defense is competition. There are some nuances that change, but 100% agree. Get out and shoot some steel, shoot some matches. And I do the same thing, Brian. When I go out to compete, I walk in there saying, man, I'm going to be top 10, knowing I'm probably going to be out of 40, top 20, right? But my goal is to move up the ranks as much as I can and just become better, because then I go back and I look and like, yeah, that match I didn't do so good, or that stage I could have done this or done that. Next time I'm not going to allow that to happen. So I agree with you there. Other than that, Chris, I appreciate you coming on. I met Chris over at the Quest 2022 with Brian Scott and Tim Herron. It was amazing. I often reach out to Chris. I did a level 3 security we talked about, and I go to Chris, hey, what kind of handcuffs do you use? What do you think of this? So Chris is a very personable guy.
It wasn't for security. He was asking for personal reasons. Get on the pipe. Don't cut the wrist.
Well, I have a friend that's carrying a fanny pack now, so I don't know what he gets into. I just figured maybe he might want some tips,
Yeah. I was gonna say, I wonder if you can run from a fanny pack and IDPA, or you can if you have the fisherman's vest, right?
Only if you can get that vest out of the way, I think.
Awesome.
And Brian, real quick, just wanted to thank Brian for coming on as well.
Yeah.
Hey, it's been my pleasure all the way around.
Yeah, man, it's been an hour and a half, and I'm like, did we even talk about the class? I know we did, but I can't believe it's already been an hour and a half. So we're going to give you the rest of the evening back. Really do appreciate you guys jumping on and sharing the knowledge with us and our listeners. It's your life. It's your safety and protection. It's your responsibility. Y'all stay safe and have a great night. Thanks a lot.